I was sitting at the bar with a beer, looking out the window at the waves on the lake. There was a storm raging outside, but I knew it was just a prelude to what was about to explode in my life. At exactly 4:22 on Sunday, 22 minutes later than she said she would see me, I received a message on my phone. As expected, it was my wife, or rather soon-to-be ex-wife. The message read, "Where are you?" The question was, is she really so stupid? Or did she think that I was so attached to her that I would accept everything that she hung on me? What should I do? Ignore her, or at least start proceedings. I had already turned off location services so she couldn't use the app to find her phone, and I paid for the hotel with an old credit card so she couldn't find the hotel information in the banking app. My answer was, gone, forever. She immediately replied, "What the—" And a few minutes later, "What do you mean I returned home and wanted to give you a gift?" I laughed. "A gift?" I replied, "No, thank you. What you are offering is no longer a gift." My phone rang, but I turned it off. It immediately rang again, and I turned it off again. I sent another message that said, "Nothing to discuss. You did what you did, and now I do what I do." It took her 20 minutes to answer. She obviously spent time composing this message. It read, "Dan, what do you mean? What are you going to do?" This weekend was a little time for me. I explained everything to you. Now that I'm back, I wanted to give you everything. I'm making dinner, your favorite spaghetti with meatballs. When can I expect you at home? I shook my head. She hadn't really been listening all week, but she always had a tendency to be distracted when she was obsessed with something. Well, it's her fault. My name is Dan Simpson, and my wife is Marge. Yes, we've heard every joke on this topic and whatnot. We had been married for 3 years, but things had not been working out between us for some time, and I thought our marriage was heading towards the rocks. That is, until my wife took the wheel and crashed right into the middle of those rocks. What I didn't know was that there was a snake in the grass in the shape of one of her work colleagues. She, Jackie Devon, was the life of the office party, whispering in Marge's ear about how my wife needed a little weird sensation to spice up our sex life. The problem started last Sunday. Marge had been acting strange from the moment she got home from work on Friday night. The first thing that caught my eye was the lack of drinking after work. She usually arrived home at 7:30, usually having had 3 or 4 cocktails. This often led to arguments and, of course, a lack of intimacy. Today, she came home at 5:30 and cooked a very tasty curry dinner. On Friday night, she attacked me, and again on Saturday morning. Instead of going to the gym and shopping on Saturday morning, where she would have met Jackie, she asked me to go shopping and have lunch with her. Saturday night was the same, good dinner and sex to order. On Sunday, she surprised me by saying, "Why don't you? I can't play golf today. You haven't been with your friends for a long time." This was not only unusual, but also alarming. She hated my friends and made sure I and they knew it. I stopped playing golf on Sundays about 4 months ago because the abuse was so bad that I just got tired of hearing it. I also knew she was distracted by something. She spent a lot of time texting on her phone and had a very worried smile as if she was trying to prove something to me. I decided to go play golf, but left with a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew I was going back to something bad, but what would it be? By the time I finished 18 holes, I regretted ever bothering. My friends made fun of me mercilessly for my henpecked-ness. My acting was so rusty, it was painful even for me to watch. And the butterflies in my stomach about what I would find at home never went away. I had one soft drink and went home as soon as I could. When I arrived, I heard Marge on the phone. Before I could get close enough to hear anything, I heard her say, "He's home, I should go, we'll talk later." Then she hung up. She turned to me with a big smile, but something was wrong with this picture and asked, "Did you play well?" I didn't want to play this game anymore. I needed to end this. So I said, "No, terrible. Are you okay? Are you preparing me for a big talk tonight?" I knew I had hit a nerve because the mask slipped and the smile disappeared, replaced by a look that suggested she was terrified. I just turned and walked upstairs saying, "Obviously you have something planned. so I'm going to go take a shower before we get to the big reveal on your schedule. Yes, I was a bit of a jerk, but I knew that this act of being a perfect wife was not for my benefit, and I wanted her to know that. I had just dried off when Marge came into the bedroom. She said, "Come down. When you're done, I want to propose to you. We both know our marriage needs a reset, and I think I've found a solution." Well, it was at least an improvement. Over the past few months, she has steadfastly refused to discuss our marriage. The problem is, did Marge come up with the solution, or was it Jackie's suggestion? If it's the latter, I have a feeling I won't like it. As soon as I changed, I went downstairs and found her sitting in her office, working on the computer. We had a large two-seater desk, which meant we could both work on opposite sides of the desk, and we both set up our own workstations. I had a desktop computer, a printer, and trays. She had a laptop, a printer, and a large space that she filled with junk, mostly magazines. I sat down opposite her and she looked up at me and smiled. She began to explain her train of thought. "You look fresh. I was hoping to talk to you after dinner, but you beat me to it. You've been saying for months that our marriage was going downhill, and although I knew it, I didn't know what to do." Jackie noticed how depressed I was, and she eventually got it out of me that I was worried about our marriage leaving the coursey. We talked, and she said she used some tricks to keep things fresh in her marriage. At this point, I raised my hand, interrupting her. I thought Jackie had been divorced twice and said she would never marry again. Is she really a good person for marriage advice? Marge looked at me. For the first time since I entered the office, I noticed that she was wearing glasses. Marge needed glasses, but she never wore them unless she was deep in thought about something. Obviously, this was serious for her. I just hoped it would be reasonable. She continued, "Both of her husbands were older than her and a little old-fashioned. I know you're more modern." She then reached over to the stack of magazines and took the top one. She quickly flipped to a page that was dog-eared, clearly marking the location. She passed it to me, saying, "Jackie said she was going to use it to freshen up her second husband, but he just couldn't see the benefit of it. I can see it easily, and I know you can see it too." I took the magazine, but continued to look at Marge, knowing that she wanted to say something, but was clearly waiting for me to start reading. She couldn't hold my gaze and went back to the computer screen. As I slowly looked away from her, I noticed that there were several pages on her printer that she had just printed. I first closed the magazine to see what kind of magazine it was. It was a women's magazine known for its scandalousness. I knew she didn't buy this magazine. She preferred the ones with more gossip, so they gave it to her. I checked the date and it was released over a year ago. I looked at her and saw her biting her lower lip. When I looked at her, she looked back at the screen. She was absolutely horrified by my reaction. This did not bode well. I opened it to the marked page and peeled back the folded page. The headline told me what a mess I was in. It read, "The answer to a drifting marriage. Overcome your husband." I threw the magazine across the table and it landed on Marge's keyboard, and I just said, "No, no way." She looked at me and said pleadingly, "Won't you read this? There are studies on how it works, and the results were amazing. Jackie said her second husband studied it and was interested in it, but in the end, he was too old-fashioned." At this point, I took deep breaths to try to reduce my anger, but it didn't help. I hissed at her, shouting, "Well, if refusing it is considered old-fashioned, then I'm as old-fashioned as he is. Even suggesting it is a reason for the end of our marriage. If you do this, our marriage will end. End. Finito. Do you understand?" Jackie said you'll be upset at first, but you need to see the benefit. I showed you what I can be like when I'm happy. This weekend was great. Doing this once a month will make every weekend the same, she said in a voice which was half pleading, half whining. I don't think she noticed, but it irritated me, like someone dragging their fingernails across a chalkboard. I shook my head. "Marge, this weekend was fake. I'm not the only one who won't accept what you offered as a prince for you to behave like a slut. I promise you, I will walk out of this door and never come back. No ifs, no buts, no attempts at consultation or reconciliation. Do I need to be any clearer? When I stood up, she picked up the pages from the printer. Read these articles. They are written by men who have lived this lifestyle. See how horny they get. I guess after the first weekend, I'll be happy to let you watch it if you want. With that said, she twirled her hair in a way that was supposed to be flirty, but in the current circumstances made her look very low, at least in my eyes. I took another deep breath and continued, "If you want to be my wife, it won't happen. If it does, we're done." She stood up and tried to speak in a commanding tone. "Damn it, Dan. Stop thinking about yourself for once. We need to spice up our marriage, and this is the fastest way to do it. I need excitement, and you need something to motivate you. Jackie, Mel, and I are going to a hotel next weekend with 3 of Jackie's friends. I met them all last week, and they will give me fantasies that I will bring home to you, and we will share them together. I never thought you would be so adamant. It will happen, Dan. Accept this." With these words, she walked out the door. I sank into a chair. I had 5 days to save my marriage. The question is, did I want it? I ordered myself a pizza. When she was delivered, I returned to the office. Marge said, "I made you dinner." I just replied sarcastically, "Your food is bitter, and so is your ultimatum." Then I closed and locked the door. I heard her trying to open the door. She then shouted through it, "This is not an ultimatum. This is a well-thought-out proposal to prolong our marriage." I ignored her. I stayed in the office for about 3 hours, researching Jackie, her other friend Mel, whom I had never heard of or met, and who these 3 men might be. I also researched divorce laws and my options for leaving the house if the worst happened. I went out around 8 in the evening and sat in the living room watching TV. She tried to sit on my lap, but I didn't let her. Finally, in a whisper that was meant to be sexual, she said, "I'm going to bed. I hope you'll follow me soon." I stayed watching TV for a couple more hours. I wanted to see what Jackie had put into her head. My first stop was her phone, but she took it to bed with her, which wasn't unusual. I went into the office and turned on her computer. In the email, I discovered that all the links she had printed out came from Jackie, along with a list of items that needed to be presented to me. The laptop and phone were syncing email, so I saw the email she had sent from her phone about an hour earlier while she was in bed. It said, "It turned out worse than I expected. He didn't even read the article and is threatening divorce. He, categorically, refuses to talk and now doesn't want to go to bed, even when I offered myself to him." Jackie's Aunt Sorella, "Hold on. He's just being a jerk, but he's probably dreaming about it." I waited as long as I could, but I was so tired that I had to go to bed. I thought about going to the guest room, but knew she would think I was sulking if I did. Then she'll think that all she has to do is get me back in bed for her plans to work. So I went to the master bedroom, changed my clothes, and went to bed. I was slowly falling asleep when Marge reached under the covers. I pushed her hand away and turned to her. "No thanks. We won't do this anymore until you give up on this idea." She tried to touch me again, saying, "But how can I show you how good this will be if you won't let me touch you?" Then it's time for the guest room. I stood up from the bed, saying, "The thought of touching you while you dream of infidelity disgusts me. I don't want to touch you in any way. I will sleep in the guest room. This bed is now desecrated by your dreams of infidelity." As I left the room, she jumped out of bed after me, screaming, "No, no, it's not cheating when you know it, and it's for us. Please come and see how wonderful it can be." I closed and locked the door when she tried to turn the handle. Then I said, "Go away, Marge. I really don't want to see you, let alone touch you." On Monday morning, everything went as expected. I left the house before she woke up and contacted a family law attorney, telling them the whole situation. Our finances were simple, no children, current home rented. We were looking at a new house, but didn't sign any contracts. I made more than her, but child support wouldn't be an issue since there were no children, and I paid rent. I didn't need proof of infidelity, so I asked a lawyer to prepare the papers for a divorce based on unreasonable behavior that resulted in irreconcilable differences. Then I went to the bank, opened a new account for myself, and split my savings and investments in half. Back at the office, I changed the account for my salary from the general account to my new account. I also prepared letters to the landlord giving a month's notice and letters canceling all utilities. When I returned home on Monday evening, I found Marge dressed in a tight t-shirt and loose shorts, apparently with the intention of showing off her charms and giving me easy access to whatever she was doing. I also smelled dinner. She's never cooked on weekdays, so she went full throttle. As I walked through the door, she turned to speak, but I didn't look at her. I just walked up the stairs into the guest room and closed the door, locking it behind me. I remembered to pick up all the door keys before I left this morning, so there was no need to change the locks or barricade myself. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone trying to open the door. There was then a knock on the door before Marge said, "Dan, dinner is ready, and I was hoping we could make a little love tonight." I lay on the bed and said, "I'm not hungry. You canceled your weekend trip?" She cleared her throat and replied in an arrogant tone, "Of course not. That's why I feel so sexy. I can't wait to see you walking me out on Friday and then see you sitting on the couch on Sunday, waiting to hear all about it and then have me back, and I'm excited just thinking about it." I laughed. I don't know why, but I knew it was an unpleasant laugh. "Marge, that's not going to happen. All you're doing is ruining our marriage. Go down and think about what you're doing. I don't want to see you, and the thought of touching you now makes me sick." She knocked on the door and demanded, "Dan Simpson, come out here right now. This is important to our marriage. You need to start getting used to it." I didn't speak, I didn't move, but the worst thing was, I didn't feel anything. I should have been sad, but I wasn't. I mourned my marriage later. At that point, I just wanted it to end and started hoping she would just do it so I could start the divorce. Tuesday morning, I got up early and went to the master bathroom to shower. While I was in the shower, I heard the door being tried to open 2 or 3 times. Then I heard Marge say, "Dan, maybe we can save water and take a shower together." I didn't even answer her. After a few moments of silence, she banged loudly on the door and shouted, "Damn it, Dan, that was supposed to motivate you and me. Why are you acting like that?" I replied, "Because it turns me off. I have no desire for your disgusting fantasy." After a few seconds of silence, she blurted out, "Listen, Dan, we're doing this. I'm offering myself to you now. If you don't want to, fine. I'm sure you'll be more willing by Sunday night." I dried myself and got dressed, and then left the house without going near her. I looked at local properties on Tuesday and found a month-to-month rental on the opposite side of town. I couldn't get in until next Friday, so I booked a hotel in the mountains. It was winter, so it was cheap at that time of year. I booked the next week of work and waited for my marriage to take its toll. We avoided each other on Wednesday and Thursday. It was very easy since I lived in my own room. On Thursday evening, I printed and signed all the letters, including checks for expenses, before closing. Friday morning, I sat at the kitchen table waiting for Marge to come down the stairs. She entered the kitchen with a travel bag. When she saw me, her face broke into a big smile, and she walked towards me, holding out her arms for a hug. She said, "I knew you'd come to terms with this and be here to see me off. I hope you're as excited as I am." I held out my hand, preventing her from getting closer to me, and replied, "I'm here to see if you're going for it. If so, then I'll leave the house and never come back. Do you understand?" She was clearly angry and blurted out at me, "Dan, I expect you here at 4 o'clock on Sunday. This is how our marriage should go. If you are not here, I will impose a ban on sex for a month." I actually laughed at her delusions. "You are not listening. If you do this, I will impose a ban for life. I will be home at 7 in the evening. If you are not here, then our marriage will be history." I was useless at work all day. I left work early and went to see a lawyer. He completed all the paperwork, and I showed him the bank statements confirming that I split everything in half. We agreed that my wife would be served with the papers at 8 o'clock on Monday morning at my former home. As I was leaving the lawyer's office, I received a text message from an unknown number. There was a photo of my wife with a man holding her hand, and they were standing at the front desk of a hotel I didn't recognize. The message read, "It's time for you to become a cuckold weakling." I showed it to a lawyer who made copies. I went straight to the post office and sent various letters. Then he returned to his former home, where he packed a bag to last him a week. I put the rest in the car and drove to a rental storage unit, where I rented a locker for a week and left all my stuff there. From there, I drove to a hotel in the mountains, checked in, and went to a bar to begin mourning the death of my marriage. So, as the rain pattered off the big window, I felt the warmth from the big open fire and the warmth from my bourbon on the rocks. The first message came through my phone. I smiled when her second message came with, "What the—" I wondered if she really thought that I would become her cuckold. Did she really not understand me at all? A few minutes later, I received a message from the same unknown number that sent me the photo on Friday. It read, "Hi, Dan, it's Mel. Why aren't you here for Marge? She's so confused and even says your stuff is missing from the house." I ignored the message, and 5 minutes later, they called me from the same number. I picked up the phone. "What do you want, Mel?" She didn't expect me to be so abrupt and faltered a little before recovering. "Dan, your wife is waiting here for you to take her back. What are you up to?" I just said, "That stupid bitch doesn't have anything I want or need back. I told her if she does it, we're done. She did it, we're done. Don't bother calling again." With that, I hung up. Immediately after this, another number called. This time, the caller said, "Dan, this is Jackie. What do you mean in your text when you say we're done?" I laughed. "What do you think this means?" Jackie was furious. She said, "Dan, I have no idea what that could mean." I couldn't resist. "She'll find out tomorrow," I said, and hung up, turning off the phone. I turned on the phone at 7:30 in the morning. The lawyer was supposed to call me as soon as she received the documents. As soon as I turned it on, the phone was flooded with voice messages. I counted at least 40 texts, and the voice mailbox was full. I looked through them, and they were all from Marge, Mel, or Jackie. I noticed that the last voicemail was around 1 o'clock in the morning, but the last text was only 15 minutes ago. I deleted all the texts, but left the voicemails so she couldn't be more. At 8:05 a.m., my lawyer called. I answered, and he said, she was handed the documents at exactly 8:01 in the morning. There were 2 women in the house with her. They tried to force the bailiff to take the documents back, but naturally he refused, saying that she was obliged to accept them. "Something will happen in a few minutes." I thanked him and hung up. As soon as I did this, 3 messages arrived. The first was from Mal. "You're a heartless bastard." I ignored it, but blocked her number. Naturally, the next message came from Jackie. "So you're just another dinosaur?" I replied, "Yes," and blocked her number. The last one was from Marge. It read, "Why, Dan, I thought you were okay with this." I couldn't help but laugh. I replied, "I have made it very clear that I do not agree with your plans, and if you continue, this will be the end of the marriage. Get a lawyer, and let's end this marriage." I left my room and went to breakfast. The hotel was surprisingly busy, and the breakfast was very good. I had just finished my coffee when my phone rang. I looked at the screen expecting it to be Marge, but it wasn't. It was my mother. I replied, "Good morning, Mom. What are you doing today?" The answer was not helpful. "What do you think? You expect me to accept you divorcing your wife? Get a grip and get back to your wife. You need her, and she won't do it too often." I was stunned. I expected my mother to understand that I could not live with what she had done. I said, "You know she went away for the weekend to cheat on me. Did she explain to you that she intended to do this regularly? If you think I can accept this, then you are not the woman who raised me with a moral compass and self-respect." She laughed and said, "This is the 21st century." I hung up. I'm not going to put up with this nonsense. I was inundated with messages from many people. The messages were pretty much the same. They all told me to accept what she did and go home. I just blocked the numbers. At the end of the week, I left the hotel drove to the storage area, and headed to my new apartment. I wasn't looking forward to work on Monday. I was out of reach last week, but come Monday, everyone will know where to find me. I had a bad feeling, so I called my boss and told him what happened. He was amazed, not only by what Marge had done, but by how many people were trying to get me to accept it. I asked to be allowed to work from home, and he agreed. At 10 o'clock on Monday morning, he called me and said, "This is ridiculous. Marge, your mom and 2 or 3 others are calling every few minutes trying to talk to you. When we say you're working from home, they want your address. Now Marge and your mom are in the waiting room and are basically causing trouble by refusing to leave the front desk. You need to do something, and you need to do it now." I called my mom. She immediately responded, "Where the hell are you? Why are you ignoring your wife, and why haven't these divorce papers been withdrawn yet?" I took a deep breath. These documents will not be revoked. I will no longer, and I never want to be with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I work from my new home and will be filing for a restraining order. She laughed and said, "You think that's going to stop me?" I laughed back. "Probably not, but the prison food you'll have to eat, yes." I hung up and called my lawyer. I told him the whole story and gave him my boss's number. 2 hours later, my wife and mother were served with restraining orders prohibiting them from coming within 500 yards of my workplace and new home. My lawyer asked that my address be kept secret. This at least calmed things down in the office, but they were calling me around the clock and I had no choice but to block them. 3 months later, we were in court. Marge found a shark among the lawyers with a plan to try to derail the divorce. Her first plan was to argue that her behavior was not unreasonable, arguing that the weekend away was not for sex. The photo and caption ruined that theory, but they forced us to confirm the photo and we even had to figure out the location. Luckily, one of my lawyer's staff recognized the hotel and we were able to obtain hotel security footage to confirm the photo and time. My mother, Marge's friends, and even my sister testified about why we should stay together, and today's hearing was for them to testify and to consider Marge's request for forced marriage counseling. At this stage, I was tired of suffering. Every time I left the house, I met someone who pressured me to go back to Marge. I was harassed at the grocery store by an uncle who my wife asked to talk to me. Some of my evangelical clients cut my orders, saying they would not work with me until I returned to my marriage. Even on the street, a neighbor attacked me and tried to drag me back to Marge. I applied for a new job over 600 miles away. I submitted my resignation, worked it out, and left my previous job. My new job started in a week. I wasn't going to go into counseling. She could have gone to hell. The judge began the case, and Marge's lawyer began his arguments. He said we were a happily married couple, and everyone who knows me thinks I'm making a huge mistake. He called my mother, sister, and several friends, or former friends, to the stand. They all testified about our marriage and urged the judge to deny the divorce, or at least impose an obligation on me to undergo marriage counseling with instructions to enter into the reconciliation process. Marge then stood up and made an impassioned appeal to the judge. She began, "Your Honor, my husband and I have been together forever. We were the perfect couple. Both our families see this, and we will provide a loving and stable home for children. Lots of children. Yes, I made a terrible mistake because I listened to people whom I considered friends. But now I understand that they just wanted me to be just like them. I beg you, stop this divorce and send us to counseling. I know if Dan had listened to me, his mother, and all of our friends, he would understand what steps I took to correct. Let me tell you what steps I have taken to make sure this never happens again, and the love I have for him, and only him. Please, Your Honor, do not allow this divorce. Make him come back to me, and our marriage will be strong and lasting." As she sat down, I saw her dabbing her eyes, and my mother leaned over and hugged her tenderly before looking at me with a smile of triumph. I looked at my lawyer, who shrugged. "Now, he will put pressure on you." I asked, "Can I also speak to the court?" To which my lawyer nodded, then stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client would also like to address the court." The judge nodded, but then added, "Mr. Simpson, your wife made a very passionate and sincere plea to this court. Even when divorces are contested, I have rarely seen or heard such love and conviction. I want you to think about what you are doing. This woman truly believes that you have a future together, and I feel it is my duty to try to make it happen. My first thought was, oh God, the whole world is against me. Well, stop the world, I want to get off. I looked at the judge and began. Your Honor, her conversion was for her own sake. But when she pulled her little stunt, she destroyed my love for her. If you force me to go to a counselor, I will tell them that, and I will tell them that reconciliation is impossible. I know my wife, and she will think that if you force us to get back together, I will have to take more days off like this. I'm telling you now, that won't happen. For the record, I'm moving out of state. As soon as I said this, I saw my mother's head suddenly turn towards me, and there was fire in her eyes. And I'm flying out to a new location tomorrow. You can't and won't force me back into a marriage I don't want. If you request counseling, I'll just call off the divorce. I doubt I'll ever want to get married again, so divorce, this is just a legal formality. If I do this, you can't force me to go to counseling, and you can't force me to live in the same house as my ex-wife. And she is my ex-wife, no matter the outcome of this hearing. You also can't force me to love her. If I call off the divorce, Marge will be left with a house and no support. So, Your Honor, what will happen? By this time, Marge and my mother were in tears, and Marge's lawyer asked for a short break to speak with his client. The judge called a 30-minute recess, then ordered my lawyer to meet him in his office. I remained sitting at the table, having nothing to do but look around the room. People were milling around, but a visibly upset Marge sat in the back, having a quiet conversation with her lawyer. My lawyer is back. The judge is seriously angry with you. He told you to never appear in his court again. If Marge asks for counseling, he will order it. But if you call off the divorce, he cannot and will not stop you. He asked you to think carefully about your actions, but ultimately, it is your choice. As he finished, the court clerk came out and approached Marge's lawyer. They talked, and he went to the judge. About 10 minutes later, he came out and approached Marge. He whispered something to her, and she put her head in her hands and nodded. My mother looked at me, and I saw the fury on her face. She started to get up from her seat, but the lawyer put his hand on her arm and said clearly, "Don't do this, Mrs. Simpson. It won't do you any good." The judge returned to the courtroom, and the hearing resumed. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Simpson, you have made your position very clear. If I order counseling, you will effectively leave your wife destitute by renting a house. Of all the possible outcomes, that would be the worst. So, Mrs. Simpson, for your sake, I do not accept your petition for counseling. I am granting the request for divorce based on the financial position outlined by your attorney." In essence, she received most of the savings. I didn't care. I was free. I heard the hammer hit and ran out of the courtroom, not allowing anyone to come near me. I had a flight to fly out the next morning at 6 o'clock, and I booked a room at the airport hotel. Everything I owned was in my new apartment. My plan was to leave the city as quickly as possible so that no one could find me. The taxi took me to the hotel, and I spent the night in my room, eating dinner from room service. My old phone number had been disconnected for a long time, so no one could track my phone or call me, but I knew that my mother would be looking for me all over the city. She wasn't going to give it up. I left the hotel at 4 in the morning and was on the plane at 5:30. My new life stretched ahead. 6 years have passed since that day in court. My new job took shape, and I was now a senior manager in the engineering department. I had just finished cooking dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened it without looking through the peephole and saw Marge and my mother standing in the hallway. I just looked at them. "So, even now, you won't leave me alone?" My mother practically pushed me out the door, and then they both walked into my house. I closed the door and followed them. Both sat down without an invitation. My mother began, "Well, Dan, I thought you'd have calmed down by now. We found you 6 weeks ago when you registered to vote in this town. Marge has found a new job in the area and will be moving into this apartment. She needs you and you need her. I'm sure you're miserable without her." I just smiled when I heard the door open. Callie screamed, "I'm home," as she walked into the living room with a smile on her face. My mother, who was wearing another one of her solemn smiles, snapped at me. "Who is this?" Marge's face paled at this time, as Callie stood with her hands on her hips, looking at the two people who were looking at her. I said, "Callie, meet my mother and my ex-wife. They were just stopping by for a minute, but I think they'll be leaving soon." Callie turned around so they could see the obvious small baby bump on her body. I saw Marge's hand go up to her mouth. All my mother could say was, "Is this yours?" My smile told her everything she needed to know. I said, "Don't worry, Callie made sure I was nothing but happy." With that, I took mother by the hand and said, "It's time for you two to go back to your lives and leave me alone with yours. Goodbye." I pushed them both out the door and turned to Callie. "The supper is ready. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one."